Good to see you again. My name is Paul McGuire, and this is a prophetic report regarding what I believe is going to happen in the year 2016. And for many of you that know my ministry, Paul McGuire Ministries, I have been doing these prophetic reports for quite a few years. And it's usually around this time of year that I give a prophetic projection of what I believe is going to occur in the following year. And there's been some amazing accuracy in some of the things that I've said. Now, I want to say something in terms of prophecy. In terms of that, I want to say right up front, I don't claim to be a prophet, you know, on the level of like Joel or Ezekiel or Isaiah and the Old Testament prophets. In fact, I don't know anybody alive today, or I don't know of anybody alive since the time of the apostles who has had that status as a prophet. I don't call myself a prophet, by the way. Other people do, but I don't call myself that because the way I don't make predictions. I seek the face of the Lord, first and foremost, regarding what's going to come. But I do an intensive amount of study and research. And I believe the Lord honors that, and especially the research and the intensive study. He honors that, and He helps me shape it and formulate it to give an accurate analysis or a projection of what's going to happen. So I want to get that definition out there up front. I am a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ. I do have prophetic gifts. I have been called supernaturally by the power of the Holy Spirit to minister the gospel and to do what I'm doing. And that's important. No man called me to do this. And that testimony of that calling is supported by the fact that I have the endorsement of many, many well-known Christian leaders. Anyway, enough of that. I want to get into what I believe is going to happen in 2016. America, I believe that 2016 is going to be one of the most crucial years for America that has ever occurred. And I believe that 2016 is going to be a year of great challenge and great calamity. But I also believe that 2016 is going to be a year of great opportunity, great open doors, great provision, if you will, and great change for those of God's people who choose to seek His face. There's a prerequisite there. Life can be really nasty and ugly in 2016 for those who are purely relying on their own human wisdom and their trust is in themselves. And that would include many Christians, by the way. The majority of the Christian church in America is essentially relying on itself, its humanistic power. And they're not really relying on God. You know, we're not really trusting in God. And for those people who really trust in God, and then not only trust in God, but the evidence of the fact that they're trusting in God is the kind of fruit that they bear in their lives, it's going to be a year of great opportunity. Great opportunity with challenges. So there will be storms, there will be challenges, and that doesn't mean you're out of the will of God, but you will be blessed, and God will give you the power to overcome those challenges. And if you really seek the Lord and walk in His ways, it can be a time, I believe 2016 will be a time of unprecedented opportunity, unprecedented calamity, but also unprecedented opportunity for those people who are prepared. When I mean prepared, I'll explain later. And those people who are diligent to seek the face of the Lord. Because the Word of God tells us that God is a rewarder of those that diligently seek Him. And ask yourself the question, how many people do you know who diligently are seeking the Lord diligently? And the other question I would ask is, are you seeking the Lord diligently? Because the word doesn't say that, it says very clearly, with the emphasis on the word diligently, as long as they, God's people, continued to seek the Lord, they continued to prosper. So their prosperity, and that would include financial and opportunities and careers and ministries and open doors and all kinds of things. Their prosperity was directly related to whether or not they were diligently seeking the face of the Lord. Now, the reality is that most Christians in America and around the world are not diligently seeking the Lord. They're casually seeking the Lord, if that. Most are not even seeking the Lord. The greater majority is casually seeking the Lord when it's convenient for them. And then there's the minority, the remnant church, who are diligently seeking the Lord. So those who are diligently seeking the Lord, God will prosper even in times of challenges. Because in times of challenges, there's a massive restructuring of all kinds of systems. There is a transformation in the economic realm and social realm and every realm of society and culture. And those people who are prepared and understand what's going on can position themselves in advance to prosper, to prevail, to take the land like Joshua and Caleb, to launch ministries, to preach the gospel like never before. But it's not going to happen unless you diligently seek the Lord. Now, so I want to say right up front, as I give a prophetic analysis of what I believe is going to occur in 2016, I want to say up front that it's going to be a year of incredible shaking and calamity. That's going to happen in the United States and globally. There are going to be very sudden changes. There's going to be what I would call shock events, a lot of them. And at the same time, there will be unprecedented opportunity for ministry, for God's protection, for God's guidance, for promotion, for those who diligently seek the Lord. Let's take the example, for example, of Joseph and Daniel. Now, Joseph was supernaturally called by God, and Egypt and the Pharaoh were about to face an incredible economic crisis. And this economic crisis had geopolitical ramifications in the sense that if Egypt collapsed because it had no food supplies, that would have undermined their military might and made them vulnerable to be conquered from outside groups. The vulnerability in Egypt's food supply could have brought down their empire because it would have weakened them. So the food supply was such a significant part of their foundation of power that if it was undermined, it could have caused the invasion or collapse or massive degradation of the Egyptian empire. That's how important it was. It wasn't just about food. It was how food connected, the food supply connected to everything else. So God raised up Joseph. You know the story. He was sold into slavery and he began to interpret dreams supernaturally. And he interpreted Pharaoh's dream about the 7 years of plenty and the 7 years of famine. And it was a prophetic dream, and the Lord gave Joseph the supernatural ability to interpret the prophetic dream, which had to do with economics and geopolitics. And then he showed Pharaoh precisely what Pharaoh had to do in terms of preparation and the building of massive storehouses to store wheat and other items so that the Egyptians could prosper and prevail during the 7 years of famine. this was also a means of supernaturally protecting God's people in the time of famine also. So God used Joseph to bless Egypt, and God used Joseph to protect and to bless his people. And you all have read the story of what happened when his father and brothers came back. And so Joseph was raised up, he was promoted into spheres of great authority in the Egyptian kingdom, which was an occult kingdom. And make no mistake about it, the courts of Pharaoh and the entire Egyptian system is what I call, in a number of my books, the Pharaoh God-King system. They believed that the Pharaoh was God. He had surrounding him sorcerers, soothsayers or prophets, interpreters of dreams, and all these, when I say magicians, I'm not talking about carnival act magicians, men and women who had supernatural power, and that supernatural power really did work. So the governing structure of Egypt was built on a supernatural power system that was borrowed from Babylon. In fact, the Tower of Babel, the structure, the shape of the Tower of Babel is called a ziggurat, and we see the pyramid is also a ziggurat. So Egypt and the Pharaoh God-King system, and by the way, we're still under the Pharaoh God-King system, morphed itself into ancient Egypt. Now, when I say we're still under the Pharaoh God-King system, this system simply means, and I explain it in my book, A Prophecy of the Future of America, this and my new book, The Babylon Code. This simply means that the people are socially engineered to believe that the Pharaoh is a god, or that the world rulers possess some kind of superior power or intellect than the common man. And that's where we get the expression, the divine right of kings, and so on and so forth. So this indoctrination by the Babylonian elite, which has now morphed itself into the Illuminati, it became the Rosicrucians, passed on through secret societies, is the foundation of our geopolitical system today. So when you turn over the back of the U.S. dollar, you see what? An Egyptian pyramid that says New World Order, translated from Latin, and there's the all-seeing eye of Horus, or the all-seeing eye of Lucifer. It's an Illuminati symbol, and it's an Egyptian pyramid. And essentially what it's saying is that there's going to be a new world order that is going to be built on a hierarchical system with the elite at the top, the ruling elite, the scientific elite, as Huxley said, or the technocratic elite, and they operate from behind the scenes. And then you have the masses, who are the serfs and the slaves. And this has been passed on throughout the centuries in many, many empires. It operates today. Behind the U.S. government is a shadow government, an invisible government that is composed of the elite that control the global economic system, the U.S. economic system, geopolitical affairs, and essentially control our society. They are also called the Illuminati. You know, it really doesn't matter what they're called, the actual label, because they constantly change labels. But that's the way our world works. So that's important to understand, that God raised up a man who didn't freak out when he was pushed into the center of this occultic system. He didn't go berserk and demand that everybody repents. He behaved himself, act wisely and intelligently, and God was able to elevate him to make real changes and to be a blessing to God's people. If Joseph acted like the typical Christian today, who would have gone berserk and started denouncing Pharaoh in the courts of Egypt for being a pagan god and worshiping Satan and all the rest of the stuff, the typical stuff that a lot of Christians do, he wouldn't have risen to power. He would have made no change. In the same way, Christians who do that today make zero change. I mean, it's a nice emotional discharge, but it's really counterproductive in the long term. And that's a lesson that you and I need to understand, no matter what kind of job we have. Then we have Daniel, who also was placed as a supernatural advisor and prophet to King Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king of Babylon. And he interpreted King Nebuchadnezzar's dreams and King Nebuchadnezzar's successor's dreams. And he had all these prophecies of what would happen to the Babylonian Empire. And then Daniel was given prophecies of what would happen to Israel in the last days. Daniel was given prophecies regarding the coming of the Antichrist. Daniel was giving prophecies on how to manage their geopolitical affairs. And Daniel was given a precise chronology of world events for the children of Israel, called the 70 Weeks of Daniel, a timetable for the return of the Messiah. And Daniel was also given prophecies about the rise of 4 great world empires, which happened in history. And Daniel predicted up until our time, when right before our eyes we're seeing the what Daniel refers to as the 4th beast, or the revived Roman Empire rising in power. And what is the revived Roman Empire? It's the coming one world government, the coming one world religion, and the coming one world economic system. And that's what's happening right now. Now, the motto of the people behind this massive transformation, which is, by the way, the reemergence of Babylon, we deal with that in the book, The Babylon Code, it's based on, the template is based on the Tower of Babel, which was the world's first one world economic system, one world religion, and one world government. And that's what's being formed right now. And their motto is order out of chaos. That you create chaos to create radical transformation. And that's what we're seeing. Now, it's important that you understand that, because when you understand that, when you understand God's Word, when you understand the mechanisms of economic, societal, and governmental and cultural transformation, then you're able to be proactive and intelligent about what's going to happen. And you know what's going to happen before it happens, because you've learned from history. And that's where I want to impart, if I can, to you what I believe is going to happen based on historical analysis, based on the Word of God, based on prayer, and then, of course, economic analysis, geopolitical analysis, cultural analysis, so on and so forth. So what is going to happen to America? The engineers of the New World Order, they don't like to use the word right now, so they call it global order, or new international financial order. Now they just put a little spin on the words. So, for example, you'll see a speech by, I call him George Bush Sr., going into the first Gulf War against Saddam Hussein. And he makes this speech on all the national television programs. And George Bush Sr. Makes some statements, and he calls for openly a new world order. He also talks about, it was kind of an occultic prayer. He was calling forth for the spirit of Moriah to come and help the U.S. and U.S. troops. Well, who's the spirit of Moriah? This is not a biblical prayer. The spirit of Moriah comes, it's a spiritual being taught in Freemasonry and occultic circles, because George Bush is a member of George Bush Sr. is a member of Skull and Bones. George Bush Jr. is a member of Skull and Bones, secret occult societies, so on and so forth. Now, the reaction can be people freak out, scream, go berserk, but you see, that doesn't affect any change. You need to pray, you need to act wisely as you interact with the power structures that be, as did Daniel and Joseph. Doesn't mean you don't do nothing. It's just that whatever you do, you're strategic and you have a divine plan, not an emotional human reaction, which does nothing. So then you notice George Bush Sr. openly uses the New World Order, and then it was a big ruckus. In fact, when Pat Robertson wrote his book, The New World Order, I had the opportunity to speak to George Bush Sr.'s top-level personal assistant. And this particular individual explained to me that George Bush Sr. was furious at Pat Robertson for making all these accusations that George Bush Sr. was involved in the Illuminati and these secret societies, which he is, by the way. And the personal assistant of George Bush Sr. Told me how upset George Bush Sr. was, which I thought was kind of schizophrenic in response, because he is a part of that. And then he would make these other statements like 1,000 points of light, which sounds very Christian. It sounds very inspirational. But when you read the occult literature behind the Illuminati and the Freemasons and other groups, you see that this terminology of 1,000 points of light comes from sources like Madame Blavatsky and others, Alice Bailey, the occult teachers, the same occult teachers who either their writings were passed on to the heads of the UN, or in Alice Bailey's case, she established Lucifer Publishing right on the grounds of the UN to indoctrinate world leaders in the practice of Satanism. I mean, that's plain and simple. Now, there was a public outcry, so they modified the term Lucifer Publishing to Lucis Trust and moved the organization off campus of the UN, but they're still very, very involved in discipling world leaders in satanic worship. I mean, they give it a more sophisticated name, but that's basically what it is. So then George Bush Jr. makes a speech, and he doesn't use the New World Order because it's now fallen on bad terms because of what his father said. So he uses the term New Order of the Ages. So when you read the words beneath the pyramid on the back of the dollar bill, Novus Order Seclorum, literally it means New Order of the Ages or New World Order. But Bush Jr. uses the term New Order of the Ages because it's more palatable. In the same way, the United Nations, which was formed for one purpose, and that is to create a one-world global socialist government. That's its purpose, to create global government. They wanted to soften their goal because people were objecting to it. So they very cleverly changed the vocabulary in all their literature and statements, and now they call it, instead of calling it global government, they call it global governance. Just playing on the words, but to soften it. And they do this all the time, to disguise the obvious. So then you have other presidents, and like Kissinger, not that long ago, was making some statements on the stock exchange in New York City, and he referred to a global economic system, and he called it the New International Economic Order. But then Kissinger, relatively recently, like a month or two ago, wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times editorial section calling for a new world order, just openly in your face, calling for a new world order. So what does this mean? It means that everything you're looking at in terms of what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening in Syria, what's happening with ISIS, what's happening with the migration invasion in Europe, what's happening with Syria, what's happening in the U.S. with immigration, migration, economics, you need to understand that all of these crisis events are designed to force the world into a new world order out of chaos. And so it's very important as you analyze events happening in the U.S. and events happening in Europe or the Middle East, that many of these events are engineered by powerful groups behind the scenes to create chaos so the elite can create a solution to move the world and the United States in the direction of a new world order. So that's how we have to understand what's going to happen in 2016. You see, once you understand the template of their thinking, once you understand the formulas they use, then it's easy to figure out the direction we're going in. Let's give another case in point. the United States of America, as well as the head of Germany, Merkel, the head of France, the head of Sweden, and the heads of a number of European nations, after they have this exploding militant Islamic population. And again, I'm not saying all Muslims are evil. I've met and befriended many moderate Muslims, and they like America and they don't want to kill people, and they're great people. Many of them, especially in the Iranian population, have escaped Iran, and they don't like that, what they think is a weird religion. But we have a very disturbingly high percentage of militant Islamic people coming in through Syria, the Syrian refugees. And I began to get reports from people in Germany who follow my ministry and my messages, and they began to tell me, way before this was even discussed in the United States, they said that the average immigrant from Syria was a male between the ages of 21 and 25 years old. And they were coming in large numbers. Now that reverses traditional philosophy, where historically when any group is going to migrate from one nation to another, the norm is, in previous history, the norm is you send the women and children first for their safety, and then the males come in. That's the norm. So the Syrian refugees are coming in 180 degrees opposite than the norm. And I began to get all these reports from followers of my ministry telling me how in their town in Germany or France, and many of these are small towns, the town had like 4,000 people, and they would tell me, well, now there's 9,000 people in a town of 4,000 people, and they would tell me 5,000 Syrian refugees have come into a town of 4,000, and the majority of them are males, 21 to 25 years old, and there's rapes of women occurring epidemically. There's beatings of the people. There's stealing, and the Syrian refugees are militant Islamic in many cases, and they're creating all kinds of life-threatening situations for people all over Germany, France, and Sweden. And I began to get report after report of people saying, my village, my town, 15,000 people, and now we have 10,000 male Syrian refugees, many of who are sympathizers or agents of ISIS. And the same thing is going to occur in the United States. And women are getting raped, that's a big part of it, and men are getting beat up. And all these guys that are coming in from Syria are of military recruitment age. So they're an army. They're an army coming into Europe and coming into the United States. And so we have this, what appears to be a contradiction of thought by these world leaders, including the United States. On one hand, we see the terrorist attacks. I was in Paris, France during the Charlie Hebdo attack a week afterwards, and all France was like shocked because they're not used to having to defend themselves. They're kind of a passive people. I don't mean this disrespectfully, but they're kind of, you see, they've been indoctrinated in socialism, so they look to government to be their father, and they can't fend for themselves. And that thinking process, by the way, which was explained to me by a French pastor at length, is epidemic all over Europe. They've been so indoctrinated in socialism that they see themselves as powerless unless the government helps them. That hasn't quite happened yet in the United States. They're working on it, but it hasn't happened yet in the United States. So they were shocked and just beginning to prepare for a terrorist attack. So then, time went on, and France had another horrible terrorist attack surrounding this theater where there was a rock and roll concert going on. And then there's other attacks, and there's, in other terrorist invasions, and people are getting raped and killed and beaten and all kinds of weird stuff by these refugees that the heads of the European governments are allowing on purpose from Syria. So you have to ask the question, why is this happening? Is it happening because of the stupidity of the European leaders? No, they're not that stupid. It's happening intentionally. And let me explain why. Because when you look at a map of Syria, you see that Syria has nations like Saudi Arabia surrounding it, and Saudi Arabia has massive land. And there are other Muslim nations that have massive land all around Syria. And yet Saudi Arabia is allowing 0 refugees into its nation. And that's okay with the world leaders and the UN. So what they're doing is they're taking all these Muslim immigrants, these males of military age who are Muslim extremists, and it would be easy to set up tents and camps for them in Saudi Arabia. No, they're taking them all the way up into Europe through Turkey, and then they go into France, Sweden, and all these other, Germany, and all these other nations. That doesn't make any rational sense. It doesn't make any economic sense. The most cost-efficient way of dealing with that problem would be to create camps in Saudi Arabia, etc. But no, they're deliberately allowing massive numbers to go into Europe. Why? Because they're stupid? No. It's an intentional strategy by the elite to use the Muslim Syrian refugees as a battering ram to destroy the social cohesion of Europe. It gives the elite the cover story or the excuse to enact all kinds of police state measures for the people's good. We're protecting you. And it consolidates the power of the elite. It gives them more of the big brother Orwellian lockdown over the people. And here's the irrationality. But see, it's not irrationality. On a superficial glance, it appears to be irrational. Nobody in their right mind who's a leader and has any access to intelligence information in their right mind would allow militant Muslims to pour into the European nations, being the threat they are, and being the fact that terrorist attacks are increasing. So you would block that off immediately. But no, they're increasing the traffic flow of Syrian refugees. Is it because they're stupid? No. It's an intentional strategy to break the social cohesion of the independent nations of the European Union, so that their governments will have the justification for more of a police state lockdown, more control over what little guns there are, more invasive surveillance state measures, and it gives the European governments the excuse to take away more freedoms from the European people and break any voting bloc. This is what you need to pay attention to. Break any voting bloc that can throw out the current politicians that are enacting these insane policies which allow the terrorists in. That's what it's all about. It's strategy. And it's a strategy empowered, funded, and directed by the elite for the benefit of the elite. Now, we take the United States of America. We are allowing increasing numbers of Syrian refugee terrorists into the United States. And as in other forced migration policies, they will be secretly shipped into the United States. There's no background check on these people. There's no serious vetting. I heard the other day that the vetting process is a telephone call. And since Syria has no records on anybody, it's a complete farce. They don't care who's coming in. They know militant Islamic terrorists are coming in. So then they're secretly shipped to these areas like North Dakota and parts of New York and LA and all across the United States. So no matter where you are in the United States, you're vulnerable because they spread them all over the European Union, especially in small towns. And the next thing you know is you have a standing army within the United States that's capable of committing terrorist acts. Now, why would you do that? Because you're not that stupid. You would do that because you're using the influx of terrorist Muslims so that they will do terrorist acts, which will give you the justification for more surveillance programs. And notice what happened immediately after San Bernardino terrorist attack. There was the calls for gun control. And believe me, the elite do not like the fact that so many American citizens have guns. They do not like that because that's a threat to dictatorial control and to a police state. So the Europeans don't really have guns. Americans do because of the Bill of Rights. But they're using the fear of terrorism, and then these bizarre coincidences of these lone wolf shooters, which, if you analyze carefully, are very, very suspicious, to enact more surveillance state measures. I heard they want to have a visa program, so if you go from one state to another, you need a visa. You know, this is like Nazi Germany, where they said, papers, please. You couldn't travel anywhere in Germany without showing your papers. But, you see, you can get away with it all to protect people from terrorism. So, you see, the terrorists serve a very useful purpose, and that's why they're being allowed in. And you need to wake up to that. So what's going to happen to America in 2016? You're going to see more terrorist attacks inside the United States. You're going to see it. More bombs going off, more shootings going on. You're going to see an increase of, white, lone wolf, so-called crazy people shooting innocent people. Because what's the game plan? Well, gun control. Hillary Clinton's already screaming for gun control. And all these people are going to demand gun control, even though the police are telling us that we can't defend you. You need to protect yourselves. And even though the data tells us that where all these massacres occurred, they were gun-free zones. So the bad guys, the criminals, the terrorists, knew nobody could defend themselves because it was a gun-free zone. They couldn't possibly have guns, so they went in and slaughtered them all. And don't kid yourself, the police understand these statistics, and so does the government. But the government doesn't care, because they have a greater goal plan, which is to move us into a new world order. And in order to do that, they have to take away the guns. That is illustrated in history. So, this is one area of disturbing. It's going to accelerate because it's, in many respects, a manufactured crisis, or it is the using or exploiting of a crisis through irrational reactions, which really aren't irrational. They're strategic and intentional. It's just people are too dumb to figure it out. Let's talk about, this is not about politics. I'm not going to say anything in favor of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, because ultimately both parties are controlled by the same powerful elites. But let's just play something out. Let's just expose with the light the game that's played. And this was exposed by Paul Ryan, who I knew was a globalist before he got his position. I mean, you do any research at all on the guy. Paul Ryan was never a conservative. He's a globalist. And he's beholding to the elite. He's doing exactly what the elite want done. That's why, in complete betrayal of the conservatives in the Republican Party, Paul Ryan funds President Obama's programs and all these liberal programs to the tune of $500 billion, which is the complete opposite of what the Republicans campaigned on. And then you see, if you're looking carefully, that the GOP, the Republican Party, as for a long, long time, through many cycles of elections, they promise one thing, and then push comes to shove, they always, not always, but they side with the Democrats, and they stand for the same thing the Democrats stand for. So there's no difference between the parties. And so with gun control, you can hear all the Republicans scream if President Obama decides to enact executive orders on more gun restrictions. As with all the other key things, you're going to have this fake protest by the Republicans, a lot of chest thumping, a lot of denouncing of President Obama. But basically, this is how it works out. The Republicans are winking at the Democrats, and the Democrats are winking back at the Republicans, and the Democrats are actually doing what the Republicans won't do, but the Republicans don't want their followers to think that they supported it. So the game that's played is, okay, we'll make Obama the bad guy because he's not running for election. He can do all the dirty stuff that we're going to support, but we're not going to say it openly. And so the Democrats and Republicans really are partners in pushing the same agenda. It's just the Republicans fake like they're upset. And you say, well, how do you know that? Well, it's obvious, because every time we come to any juncture or debate over a budget, or the Republican Party having any real teeth to do anything, they do nothing. And I mean, how many election cycles can you go through till you find the light comes on in your head and you realize that the Republican Party is really the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party is the Republican Party, with the exception of some conservatives, but the conservatives don't really get a whole lot done. And that's the way it is. We really have a one-party system controlled by the elite. And what further amplifies the problem is we now have a fourth unelected branch of government, the media, which is, we no longer have freedom of the press. We have a mass media controlled by 6 major corporations and those cable news networks. And I don't care if you think one is conservative. It's 24/7 propaganda. Okay, just propaganda. Now, I'm not telling you who to vote for, and I haven't decided who I'm going to vote for. I'm going to vote for somebody. So I'm not trying to sneakily promote a particular candidate. I'm using this candidate strict because, to me, the jury's still out on the candidate. I want to do more research, more praying, and really probe into the backgrounds, because I've probed into the backgrounds on the Republican Party of, again, I'm not judging the man. Okay, there may be legitimate reasons for it, but when I did research on Ted Cruz, I mean, Ted Cruz's wife was instrumental in the Council on Foreign Relations. It was called Building a North American Community, which essentially was using economics and laws to merge Canada, Mexico, and the United States into one unit called the North American Union. And then after that's done, you bring in all the South American states and you call it the North American Union. Now, so much of this stuff, I have a track record that goes back years. And the interesting things about writing books, there's a copyright. So my purpose in showing you the books is not to sell the books. It's just to prove the reliability. And unfortunately, I can prove it because I have a date and a copyright. So 2005, my book, Are You Ready?, was published. 2005. Talked about the North American Union, talked about who was behind it, talked about the coming merger of Canada and Mexico, and the danger it meant for the American economy. The Republicans were all behind it, and they destroyed the American economy with it, including Newt Gingrich. And Newt Gingrich is not a conservative. He's never been a conservative. He's a third-way disciple of the futurist Alvin Toffler and Heidi Toffler. Alvin Toffler wrote Future Shock, and Alvin Toffler is the guru of what's called the third way, which simply means a synthesis between capitalism and communism into socialism. So Gingrich is at best a socialist because he's the disciple of the Tofflers. And who did the Tofflers represent? The globalistic elite, because the goal of the globalistic elite is to create a one-world socialist government. Because, you see, socialism and communism doesn't benefit the common man. It benefits the elite. It gives them dictatorial control over everything, and they become more wealthy. That's why the 1% have become richer than they've ever been before, and the middle class, its income is becoming poorer than it ever has been before, under the last 2 presidencies, President Bush and President Obama, a Republican and Democrat, who are cooperating in this this scheme to redistribute wealth. So the building a North American Union, which I was there was like two. There was a anchorman on CNN, me, and a writer. And I had a national radio talk show at the time. We were the only people publicly speaking out against this because the controlled media still doesn't acknowledge it. And so in my book, I talk about CAFTA, the merger of Canada, Mexico, and the United States, the fact that NAFTA, what's NAFTA really for, the Federal Trade Agreement, and other things. And this is what causes the tremendous upheaval in our economic system. So the point is, I talk about this in detail, I warn against it, and then doing research on Ted Cruz, I discovered that his wife, I believe her name is Heidi Cruz, I'm not totally sure on that, I could be wrong, but his wife, Heidi Cruz, was an essential part of the task force that I talk about in my book, Are You Ready?, which was called Building a North American Community, sponsored by the Council on Foreign Relations, where it talks about how we need to open the borders up between Canada, Mexico, and the United States, encourage the free flow of migration, and basically unify the three nations into the North American Union. Now, what Rockefeller and Heidi Cruz, et cetera, didn't say is this is simply to replicate the European Union. So there is Cruz, this born again. He's got a lot of born again money, and all these Christians. I was talking to a well-known Christian leader the other day, and he just couldn't believe. And he's a good man. But he couldn't believe that Ted Cruz could possibly have been in agreement with this. And again, I'm not judging Ted Cruz because I don't know what really went on behind the scenes. Perhaps he and his wife disagreed in a big way, and perhaps he's moved on from it, perhaps she's moved on from it. But the very fact that it's been hidden and you have to dig for it tells me that unless he comes forth and explains what that was all about, he's essentially an agent or tool of the globalists. You have to really come to grips with these things and not just be fooled with people's outward appearances. The same with Trump. Who is Trump? What is he really about? Who's really behind him? You can't just be swayed with the emotionalism of the moment. And the same with all the candidates in both parties. So what we do see, though, is that the globalists through the United Nations and individuals like Soros are redistributing the wealth of the middle class. So since the economic crisis of 2007, there has been a steady decline of jobs and income of the middle class. And you can't have a recovery until you start bringing back manufacturing jobs and good-paying jobs. You see, you can't have a recovery if there's no access to good jobs. So both political parties are lying to you. And the Republican Party, with their contract with America, was primarily responsible for this exodus of high-paying manufacturing jobs and industries that fled America and relocated in India and China and South America, where they could produce, manufacture, and give people higher paying jobs. The higher paying jobs went to people in these other nations because they could pay them a fraction of the cost. Now you have the Republicans, and you see, I believe the Republicans are more guilty than the Democrats because the Republicans pretend to be one thing and then they're the opposite. The Democrats really aren't pretending as much. They're just in your face telling you what they're doing. They're telling you they're redistributing the wealth. The Republicans are lying to you and saying they're not, but they are. So we can't have an economic rebound without bringing back manufacturing and the high-paying jobs. And then you have to have, across the board, a pro-business culture, not an adversarial relationship between the government and the independent business owner. And that's what you have now. So our economy is being strangled. And by the way, it's being done on purpose to reduce the standard of living in America so it equalizes the playing field, so the elite can bring in their one world government, one world religion, and one world economic system. It's important for you to know that. Now, terrorism, militant Islam, and by the way, very disturbing data comes out in mainstream sources. American money has been used to finance ISIS. Maybe it was sent somewhere else, but it ended up in the hands of ISIS. Saudi Arabian money is certainly funding ISIS. So again, you have to ask yourself this question: how can you fight a serious war on terrorism when you're funding it or selling them weapons? And remember, the elite has always sold weapons to both sides in World War II and World War I, and even now. They make their money. The elite has no conscience. They'll sell guns and weapons to ISIS, and they'll sell them to the U.S. or China or whatever. And China, of course, and Russia do the same thing. So we're going to have a continual problem there. Now, here's the other problem. ISIS and militant Islam is deliberately being allowed into Western nations like America and the European Union because they're like a battering ram. The militant Muslim population is demanding that wherever they get a certain population density, that Sharia law is established. Now, you really have to understand this because it happened in Detroit, Michigan, and it happens in other places. It's happened all over Europe already, and it's happening now with increasing frequency in the United States. But you see, when the Muslims get in power in any particular geographic location, they demand that Sharia law is enforced, which is Islamic law. And it's very interesting that the media and the government and the forces that be, will smash. I mean, God forbid there would be 10 Commandments in a school. God forbid there would be a manger scene where people would say, talk about Jesus Christ openly. God forbid a valedictorian in high school will give credit to Jesus Christ for her or his success. That's all smashed down with the totalitarian brute force. But open displays of Islamic worship are totally protected. And don't think for a moment that this is not a strategic plan. They're elevating Islam and they're destroying Judaism and Christianity. They're doing it on purpose. And if you don't see that, you're blind as a bat. And why are they doing that? And this is where some of you really need to get real. And it's going to be difficult to educate your friends who are walking around in a trance state. But there is an agenda. Now listen to me carefully. This is the real deal. There is an agenda at work to destroy the United States of America as we know it. And that agenda is in full force. And if you don't get that, you can't be proactive in dealing with it. And the churches in America, their level of awareness, their level of education and understanding of these issues, their knowledge of history and how it applies to our current situation is appalling. It's abysmal. Because they're so ignorant and so dumbed down that they are incapable of leading because they don't know history. They don't know how Adolf Hitler was popularly elected by the Christians in Nazi Germany. He was elected by the Christian church, both Protestant and Catholic, and the Christian leaders. But how did that happen? Because they had no discernment. They rejected the Word of God, like American churches are doing. They adopted humanistic principles, as the American churches are doing. And they didn't have the Holy Spirit inside them, the Spirit of truth, as the majority of Christian churches of America are going down that path. And therefore, even though a demon-possessed madman, and it's a matter of historical record, that the Third Reich was a political party second, and it was an occult party first. And I talk about this in great detail in my book, A Prophecy of the Future of America. By the way, again, not for the purpose of bragging, because that's not the purpose. And it's not even for the purpose of selling a book. It's for the purpose of documentation. The copyright on A Prophecy of the Future of America was 2013. Numerous things that I predicted regarding Russia, Iran, oil, the Illuminati and Illuminati music videos, the race riots. This was in 2013 before they broke out. I warned of the race riots, the reason behind them, and where America is going, and who the secret control of America is. Wrote about it in The Prophecy of the Future of America. Back to Are You Ready? I mean, I talk about, okay, this is a good example. Let's see, there's so many issues in A Prophecy of the Future of America that I predicted in detail in advance. And I'm only saying that just because I study a lot. I do a research. I talk to very high-level people. I pray. I seek the Lord's face, and I try to break it down and connect the dots for people like you. So 2016 is going to be increased chaos. Why? Because chaos leads to a new world order. There's going to be increased measures to censor the internet. And this is very important, because right now a lot of people are taking our internet freedoms for granted. But already the hints are going out about censoring the internet. You see, because the internet is the last vestige of free speech. The six corporations that control all the major media, they all say the same thing. It's all politically correct, and they lie half the time or they cover up the truth. It's about mass mind control. And that's why the average American is dumbed down and doesn't have a clue about what's going to happen. The only place you can get real information is in the alternative media, which is largely located or connected to the internet. Now, how do we know that's happening? Because at the Bilderberg Group, which many people don't know who they are, but they are a secret society connected to the Illuminati, there was all discussions about, by the way, implementing Mark of the Beast technology, the microchip implant, the nanochip implant, and the biochip implant. But there was also the discussion of censoring the internet. And one of the heads of Google, or founders of Google, I think his name is Eric Schmidt, leaked a statement that he's going to create platforms and programs on the internet to ban hate speech. And the inference was hate speech, I guess, by Muslim terrorist groups. But no, it was more than that. The inference was he would ban anybody saying bad things about the Muslims. Well, that superficially sounds somewhat okay. But that's not where it stops. It spreads like a wildfire. Hate speech, then, is anybody who holds up traditional values of marriage is guilty of hate speech. If you say Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, no man comes to the Father but through me, you're guilty of hate speech. So the next thing you know is the preaching of the gospel of Jesus Christ is completely censored on the internet because it is categorized as hate speech, or patriotism, or all the other related things are characterized as hate speech. And so that's looming in the future, a totally Orwellian-controlled internet. Hillary Clinton also hinted of the same direction when she talked about controlling the internet. Why do they want to control the internet? Because they don't want to be exposed. They don't want to have